You just joined a Dynasty startup and are looking forward to drafting. That's awesome. All of your favorite Dynasty analysts are telling you to go heavy wide receiver. It's pretty good advice. Now you are trying to decipher your rankings and you see that your favorite wide receiver is 2 tiers below that choke artist from the team you hate. Wait, what? Well, we are here to help tonight on the Rod Pod. That's right. It's time to pull up a chair and talk some Dynasty football. I am your host, JJ Wenner. This is the Ride Or Dynasty Podcast. With me are my co-hosts, Jameson Hutchinson and Joe Harlow. Jameson, what are your overarching thoughts on this year's wide receivers?
I think they're pretty good. I think the field is starting to catch up on just the wide receiver heaviness. You know, we talk about zero RB, and I really think that's starting to catch up. So as far as drafting this year, we've seen all the mock drafts already. It leans really heavy wide receivers the first couple rounds, and I think that's just something that's going to keep on happening. So as far as looking at this stuff, making sure you hit on the right ones, know when to hold them, know when to fold them, and kind of go from there. But overall, I think it's very strong this year.
Listen, what's strong is you starting out with a Kenny Rogers reference. Joe, now looking at this year's crew of wide receivers compared to last year's, how do you feel? Like, what's the biggest difference?
The biggest difference is that we just had an elite wide receiver class for the rookies this year. 3 guys went in the top 9. Is that where Doomsday was picked? 8 or 9? Either way, 3 top 10 wide receivers, and then another dozen almost who could be legitimate players on your dynasty rosters in the next few years. I don't think we really lost anyone from last year. Maybe some of the older players go drop a tier, but they're still relevant. I don't think anyone really, unless I'm forgetting someone obvious, no one really totally tanked and is just an afterthought. So I think we're in a better place. I'm looking through our list, and there's guys in tiers 6, 7 that I would be content with in a lot of leagues.
Yeah, surprisingly, there's some guys in those later tiers. I did a redraft wide receiver show earlier this week, and there were guys that are falling that late that we were talking about might end up in the top 12 wide receivers this year for single year finish, of course. But before we start hitting on those guys, let's hear a word from our sponsors. Now, we're talking all about preparing for drafts, talking about wide receivers. What better way to prepare for your draft than with the IDP Guys 2024 Rookie Guide? That's right, it's here. Get the Rookie Draft Guide for a limited time for $9.99. The latest version includes all the post-draft feedback you need to dominate your drafts. So check out the show description below and download your copy today. Now, gentlemen, before we start, we are looking at Dynasty wide receiver tiers from Fantasy Pros. Joe and Jameson, you two are going to decide who needs to move either up a tier or down a tier or stay still. And if, and only if, you two disagree, Judge JJ is going to step in and decide. So to start, let's take a look at tier 1. Now, we have 3 players sitting up at the top of tier 1. One just signed the biggest wide receiver contract of all time, and the other 2 are eagerly awaiting their chance to take that title from Justin Jefferson. So, Joe, do all 3 of these guys belong in tier 1?
I think they all do unequivocally. I think they're the top 3 options in the game right now, and yep.
All right. So all 3 are tier 1. Jameson, any doubts about any of the top 3?
If you wanted to poke a hole in any of it, just the Justin Jefferson's quarterback situation, as far as the talent level, I think all 3 of them belong here. And it could be possible that, either Sam Darnold or, obviously the new guy that they just brought in could end up, taking them to another level. So I think all of them belong here in tier 1.
Is there any concern, and I'll just throw this out here, about Jamar Chase his reliability from week to week. Last year, in the first 11 weeks with Joe Burrow, he had 6 weeks where he scored 10 points or less. Does that concern you at all, Joe?
Not in the slightest. Have to remember that Joe Burrow was playing without a leg for the majority of that time. And then look at those first 2 weeks and Chase did nothing. And Burrow was, what were they throwing? 3 yards down the field per average. And yeah, I'm not worried about it at all. He was still getting a massive target volume. He saw 4 snap targets or less twice throughout the season. So he's a target hog. I think he's the second best receiver of this list, just quality wise. I have zero concerns whatsoever with him. Maybe
all right.
Robust, but yeah.
All right. So let's take a look then at tier 2, and let's see if anybody from this tier should be moving up into tier 1. So in tier 2, we have Amon-Ra St. Brown, Marvin Harrison Jr., Garrett Wilson, AJ Brown, and Puka Nacua. Jameson, is there anybody in this tier who you think needs to move up?
I don't think so at the moment. If Aaron Rodgers was going to be a stable quarterback that you thought could be there for a while, I think Garrett Wilson would belong in tier 1, but I'm worried that it might be a one and done and they end up back to where they were as far as quarterback purgatory. Amon-Ra St. Brown is a guy I really like. I don't think he belongs in tier 1, but I mean, he is just right below the line. I think some of the stuff that he did last year was just awesome. The only hole in his game is just some of the deep ball stuff compared to some of the guys in tier 1. But other than that, personally for me, this is more of a redraft take, but I think Marvin Harrison Jr. has gotten a little bit too expensive for a guy that we haven't seen yet. And I know we just saw what Puka Nacua did last year, but other than that, I think this tier ends up being pretty solid as well.
Joe, any thoughts on this tier 2? Anybody need to move up?
AJ Brown, I would consider moving up. He's the top of this tier to me. But still, just with the age, don't think I would at this point, and also with the inconsistencies in Jalen Hurts' game. But aside from that, no, I think we have a 3-man tier 1.
All right. So tier 1 and tier 2 right now are pretty solid, but is there anybody in tier 2 who you think should move down, Joe?
I don't think so. I would personally move Garrett Wilson down, but I've always been lower on him. Not a huge believer in his talent as a top 5 receiver, I should say. He's obviously great and dynamic, and then the Aaron Rodgers of it all, will he play more than 4 snaps this year? And then what happens afterwards? Jordan Travis and Tyrod Taylor are not exciting options, and if Aaron Rodgers plays the whole year, they're not going to be in position to get a quarterback in a weak 2025 class. So, and then Puka Nacua, it's tough. Also, similar QB situation with Stafford and his injury history and general age. But I don't think I would move either of them down really at the end.
Okay. Jameson, anybody for you moving down a tier?
I don't think so for me. I know Marvin Harrison Jr. is one of the better prospects of all time, so I think he belongs here. I'm getting a little skeptical. Not that it just for him to be in these tiers, I mean, he's really going to have to hit the ground running. And I know he's got Kyler Murray. I think if anybody could do it, it would be him, obviously. For somebody that we have not seen a snap yet, I mean, we going to the first day on the job and he's just supposed to be one of the greatest of all time. That's just something, I guess, for me to wrap my head around. But I think he belongs here in tier 2.
All right. So we have 2 solid tiers. Let's take a look at our tier 3. All right. Now we get a little bit more players showing up in tier 3, a couple more rookies. We start with Malik Neighbors, followed by Tyreek Hill, followed by Chris Olave, Brandon Aiyuk, Drake London, Jalen Waddle, Rome Odunze, Devonta Smith, and Michael Pittman Jr. Now, Jameson, from this tier, Is there any player who you think should move up to tier 2?
I'd say easily right off the bat, Tyreek Hill. If my mindset in Dynasty is always 2 years. I don't really look much farther than that just because the landscape can change so much. But I think he'll be here for the next 2 years. If it wasn't for age, he'd be in the tier 1. So I know he's 30 years old, so I'd look him.
Joe, with Tyreek Hill, do you agree that he should move up to tier 2? You're on mute.
I do.
Buddy.
I was on mute. My mistake.
It's okay.
I think he should be in tier 2.
All right. So let's move Tyreek up. You both agree on them. All right. Tyreek is now in tier 2. Joe, is there anybody else in this tier who you think should be moving up?
I'm moving Brandon Aiyuk up pretty easily. I've always been higher on, but finished wide receiver 11. Depends on format. And around back-end wide receiver 1 this year. First full year for Brock Purdy, who was also coming off a big injury. And I do think that as CMC gets older, Deebo Samuel gets older, George Kittle, all of them are getting older and all have injury history. I think Ayuk's going to really be the featured point of that offense. There is the contract issue, but I think I would be shocked if San Francisco didn't lock him down, and really think he's going to be – I think he's turned into a legitimate top 8 wide receiver for the actual NFL, and think that's really going to be reflected in fantasy.
Jameson, what do you think about Brandon Aiyuk?
I'm going to agree there. I think especially if Deebo moves on, he ends up being the wide receiver 1 by default. And I really like what he did last year. I know he started off in the doghouse with Kyle Shanahan, but I mean, he's really started to pick it up. He had a great year last year. I think Brock Purdy's going to get better as well. So I like the makeup there in San Francisco, and I think he belongs here in tier 2.
All right. So we have Tyreek Hill and Brandon Aiyuk jumping tiers. Jameson, anybody else in this tier who you want to nudge on over?
I'm not sure if I can bring him up, but I just want to talk about Michael Pittman being the wide receiver 1. I know it's pretty hit or miss just because Anthony Richardson, the fantasy quarterback, is great, but the actual quarterback's kind of a little bit different, a little inaccurate. I worry about that a tiny bit, but I really like Michael Pittman's game. And then the only other person, I know I'm higher on than most than Malik Neighbors. I know that Daniel Jones is a little worrisome, but I would not be surprised at all if Malik Neighbors had better numbers than Marvin Harrison Jr. this year. There's no competition. You know they're going to be fighting from behind most, if not the entire season. And it's not a knock on Marvin Harrison Jr., but if he didn't have the Harrison name, I think that they would be talked about a little more closely in the draft process instead of him just being the, son of Marvin Harrison, one of the best wide receivers of all time. So I know the environment's not great, but other than that, I think the rest of the tier stays as it is.
So, Joe, Pittman or Neighbors, either of those, do you think can move up?
I don't at all. Neighbors, I'm also significantly lower on. I think even if Marvin Harrison had a different name, I don't think they're close as prospects, honestly, which is, I think, just the greatness of Marvin Harrison. Neighbors is still awesome. Don't get me wrong, but the Michael Pittman, I also understand, but I just don't see a huge ceiling with him. I think he's very high floor, but I don't think he's ever giving you a shot to be a top 3 fantasy wide receiver. So I don't think he can really move up into that tier. And then Adonai Mitchell, Josh Downs, there's Jonathan Taylor, Anthony Richardson's legs. It's a lot of mouths to feed, especially around the goal line. The name I would want to bring up would be Chris Olave, but I won't do it as we talked about in the quarterback tiers episode, the Derek Carr of it all, and zero trust in that infrastructure for the franchise. I think Olave is going to be really good for a long time, but that unless Spencer Rattler hits, it'll be tough for him to really, really become a legit tier 1, tier 2 guy.
All right. So now that we know nobody is moving up, any of these guys moving down? Joe?
Not to me, no.
No, nobody for Joe. Jameson?
I would say maybe Rome Odunze just because of the crowded wide receiver room with Keenan Allen and DJ Moore. So that's the only thing. Just because Shane Waldron, when he was with Seattle, there's a lot of 2 wide receiver stuff. I worry. We haven't seen it yet, just because we haven't seen much of the training camp stuff. But if just kind of seeing how they line up, if he ends up just not being able to see the field enough, it's not a talent thing as much as it would be just the actual volume that he would get.
I thought Waldron ran a lot of 3 wide receiver sets.
Well, for as much as JSN didn't see the ball last year, they ran a lot of Lockett, and I just worry about. You also have a rookie in Caleb Williams who, we've already seems like his price is baked in that he's already going to hit. We haven't seen him play a down yet, but just that's kind of my thought process there. I think DJ Moore and Keenan Allen are both really good wide receivers, so for him to take over both of them, I think it'd say a lot about Rome, obviously.
All right, Joe. Anybody? You said nobody's moving down.
No, and I understand that with Rome Odunze. Just if Keenan Allen were not he's 32 right now, I believe. And yep. I don't see him in Chicago after this season. So I definitely, of the 3 rookies, he's the clear 3 to me in a redraft league. But dynasty wise, I'm still comfortable with him in this range.
All right.
Again, I was also higher on him than Neighbors. So some bias there.
All right. So that we're going to leave this tier as it is. I do have some concerns about Pittman, not because of his talent, but because of his QB. I know you guys both love Richardson. But Richardson is not a good passer. His passing numbers were not great last year in fantasy. Like fantasy, yeah, he might get you a lot of points, but I don't know how well he's going to support a lot of wide receivers. So that's my only concern with Pittman. All right, taking a look at the next tier, tier 4, we have DJ Moore, DK Metcalf, Nico Collins, T. Higgins, Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, Tank Dell, George Pickens, and Jackson Smith-Njigba. It's a lot of young guys in there. Jameson, which one of these guys do you think could move up to tier 3?
I'd start off right at the top with DJ Moore, wide receiver 6 last year, with pretty mediocre quarterback play, to say the least.
That's generous.
Trying to be nice. Another guy I'm thinking about is DK Metcalf. I think that, the new offensive coordinator they're bringing in from Washington is going to do a lot of good stuff. I think Gino's a good quarterback. We've talked about him. And then another guy that I'm thinking about here is Nico Collins. I think he's one of the more underrated wide receivers in the league. And I know they've got competition with Stefon Diggs, but I really do think he's been that good, and he showed that last year.
All right. So Joe Jameson came in hot. Top 3 guys in this list, DJ, DK, and Nico. He thinks should all move up. What about you?
Totally agree on DJ Moore. Massive quarterback upgrade, which I think will counteract the target share a little bit. DK Metcalf is the one of those 3 I'm a little hesitant on. Love Ryan Grubb's offense. Love Gino, obviously, but DK is not really a great ball winner. He's more of a big play underneath, and then he can still take the top off, of course, but he's not your for a 6'4" Adonis. He's not really a big ball winner, so I'm a little hesitant there, but I wouldn't fight against it. He's a borderline. Then Nico Collins is tier 3 for sure. I would honestly consider putting him in tier 2, and if Stefon Diggs wasn't there, he would be a tier 2 player for me. I think he's a legit top tier receiver in the NFL, and with a great young quarterback. So,
all right. So Nico Collins and DJ Moore, you both agreed upon. You disagreed on DK. So that comes down to me then to make this decision. DK Metcalf, it really depends for me on what type of league you're playing in. He's more of a big play wide receiver than a guy who's going to put you to death with a bunch of receptions. But we see a lot of that. But I don't see a huge difference between. Now I'm moving DK up 1. I'm moving DK up. Yeah, I think he's a tier 3 wide receiver. I think he's proven it with his production over his career. And I'm actually a little bit excited to see what Sam Howell will do if he gets in the game with a target like DK. But I'm also a little bit crazy. Joe, is there anybody else in this list, now that we got rid of the top 3, who you think belongs up in the next tier, in tier 3?
I do not.
Jameson?
I would bring up the name T. Higgins. I know that he's sitting behind Jamar Chase, but I don't think he plays. This will be his last year in Cincinnati. If he ends up going to a team that needs a wide receiver one, say how Diontae Johnson went to Carolina and automatically ends up sliding into that role. As far as his dynasty outlook, I can see the case for T. Higgins if you kind of want to buy low right now. I'm also higher on him, so that's kind of my take there. But I think other than that, everything stays as is, but that's more of a preference thing.
Joseph, any thoughts on T. Higgins moving up a tier?
I've always been a Higgins hater since his early days at Clemson. I've always hated him. He's one of my least favorite players in the NFL to watch. Just can't stand it.
Do tell, why? Is it just style? Is it personal preference?
It's a preference and style thing. I think he's elite at drawing OPI, which, as is Jamar Chase. I think they're the top 2 receivers in the league at that, which is conversation for another day. But aside from that, I'm so underwhelmed by him at all times. Just not a fan, but I don't see him as a true wide receiver 1 in the league. So I think it could be one of those where he could just be the next Kenny Golladay. I think he's a little better than that, but I don't think it'd be that drastic of a fall off. But I don't think if he gets a massive contract in free agency, I don't think he'll live up to that hype.
Damn, Joe, a Kenny Golladay comparison.
I don't think it'll be that bad. I just can't think of a big time free agent receiver who ended up being fine.
That's a lot of hate.
That's like walking by somebody and just nut tapping them, just without. I mean,
seriously, T. Higgins wasn't bothering anybody today.
I mean, Kenny Golladay is just a low blow. I think T. Higgins thing. I think he's more of an old school X wide receiver compared to a lot of these. More of a DeAndre Hopkins, not to the level of DeAndre Hopkins, but just kind of similar the way that they play. So I understand he's probably not the sexiest compared to a lot of these other guys in today's NFL, but I will make the case that he belongs at least 2 tiers above Kenny Golladay. Just my opinion, but we can move on.
I will say I definitely think he is the clear top choice in this tier. I just think would be the clear bottom choice of tier 3 right now.
I think that's
all right.
fair.
Well, as the judge, I will leave T. Higgins where he is. I'm not going to disturb that man any further than Joe's comparisons have already heard him. Now, is there anybody in this tier, though, Jameson, who you think should move down?
Excuse me, I about died.
Well, please don't die.
Just choked on my water, but I would say Jordan Addison.
Okay. Joe, any thoughts on Jordan Addison?
Another player I've been lower on. I tend to agree he should be down a bit. But yeah, I think just with having Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, and a rookie quarterback,
there's not a lot of wealth to be spread around.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jordan Addison, Jameson, are you done dying?
I'm done. I'm better now. I apologize. That'll end up on my blurbs in about 40 years. But I think Jordan Addison, he does 2 things very well. And other than that, it just a lot of that benefits from all the attention that Justin Jefferson gets. And I just worried about the quarterback situation, just like I said earlier. So I don't think he belongs in this tier. The only other person we'll get into tier 5. I was just going to bring up George Pickens. I think a lot of people are hyping him up a little too much in the offense.
Joe, what are your thoughts on George Pickens? Should he stay where he is or move down?
Also think he's getting overhyped, but I feel like he's belongs in this tier.
Okay, that is fair enough. So Addison is moving. Everybody else is staying put, correct?
I would like to argue and have a Tank Dell discussion.
I would love a Tank Dell discussion.
I've been spicy here, but I don't like Tank Dell, like at all. This made me sound really dumb last year, but I had an undraftable grade on him and definitely proved that wrong. But the talk of him being the Texans wide receiver 1 over Nico and now with Diggs, I thought was absolutely asinine. I don't see it at all. He seems and I don't think you're ever going to get more than 10 games out of him. The biggest issue is that he's tiny and not an overwhelming athlete. And when you're both of those things, you're going to get hit and hurt. And he missed how many games this year? CJ Stroud will be able to get him the ball wherever it needs to be. So he'll have some numbers, but I don't want 6 to 8 games of production a year out of a player.
All right.
Especially if he's the wide receiver 2 or 3 on his team.
So Jameson, what are your thoughts on Tank Dell?
I like Tank Dell. So, of course, we are going at it. But I think a lot of the stuff last year was his touchdowns. I mean, he had, I think it was 7 touchdowns, and he missed 6 games. So do that what you will. I don't want to compare him to Will Fuller, but I just think if he's going to hit, that's the way that he hits. 100 yards and a touchdown, and then the next game you might have 30 yards and people are mad about it. But I think for his explosiveness, I think he belongs here in tier 4.
Well, looking at being that you two have disagreed, right now in redraft, he's going in not the 3rd round. He's going in the 3rd round of wide receivers. So I think he's right around 30, 32, 31 maybe in redraft ADP. I'm not a giant fan of Tank Dell. No joke about giant compared to Tank Dell. He is tiny. I'm hoping that he can stay healthy this year because I think he can be a weapon. I think this is also like an Xavier worthy conversation that we might have in a couple minutes. I do have some concerns, but I think for now, based upon his performance last year, I would like to see what he does, and I'm happy with him in tier 4 right now.
I will say on his injury last year, he was blocking in the end zone on a run play and somebody fell on him. So it's not necessarily an injury that necessarily was on him, if that makes sense. So, but other than that, I think he's a flavor that I like. And for Joe, that's, I think a lot of people will talk about this as a better best ball pick. And I feel like that's kind of been very popular, and it gets a little lazy because we need these people in regular fantasy football too. It's just whether you want to take on the risk of the highs and lows or if you want somebody a little more even-keeled.
To keep with the spicy, with those comparisons for Dell to Worthy, I mean, I think Dell ran a 4.7 in the 40 in the combine, or 4.6s. And if we're comparing him to anyone, I think he's more of a Kiki Cutie than anything.
Yes.
Texans wide receiver.
I remember Kiki Cutie.
Those 3 games he had as a rookie. And
what
then
could have been.
Again. But getting a little spicy here. I feel like this is more disagreements than the previous couple of shows we've had, James.
It has been. I don't know. And you actually might be convincing me. I think I might move Tank Dell down. I'm sorry, Jameson. Joe has proven very, very, I don't know, persuasive so far.
It's early. We got a couple more wide receivers lined up. I could call collusion. I could just bang the collusion drum and we do that right here in the middle of it. But
do you have a collusion drum? That's not
there
fair. I have a collusion bell that I like to ring. All right, gentlemen. So we're all good. Dell and Addison are moving down. Everybody else is staying put. Agreed? Agreed. All right. So before we move on, let's have a word from our sponsors. There is nothing better than a live draft. Literally, nothing is better. So get ahead of the game right now with Trophy Smack's gorgeous draft boards, complete with player stickers so deep. Come on, Jameson, where are you? I need you on that one. So
I'm
deep,
here.
you couldn't possibly use them all. And for the first time, Trophy Smack is offering an IDP expansion pack for all of us IDP degenerates. That's right. No more scribbling names on blank stickers. Go to trophysmack.com and get the only draft board that meets all of your needs. Check out the link in the show notes and get yours today. All right. Well, Joe might have disappeared for a little bit, but that doesn't mean we can't still have fun. So let's pull up our next tier. Oh, I'm going to have to start a second column for this tier, gentlemen, just to add Mr. Dell and Mr. Addison to it. There we go. All right. In tier 5, according to Fantasy Pros, we have Xavier Worthy, Deebo Samuel, Rashee Rice, Davante Adams, Jayden Reed, Ladd McConkey, Brian Thomas, and Stefon Diggs. Mike Evans, Cooper Kupp, Amari Cooper, Christian Kirk, Terry McLaurin, Diontae Johnson, Jesus, Keon Coleman, and Chris Godwin, and Tank Dell, and Jordan Addison. This is a giant flipping tier. Can I start this tier and say who needs to move up?
Yes.
I know this isn't
Please
following
do.
the rules, but Mike Evans needs to go up a tier. Does he not? I know he's old. I know he might not have a lot of time left in the game, not in general. Sorry, Mike Evans. You're going to live a long, long time. But all he does is finish in, like he always finishes in the top 20. That's just what Mike Evans does. He has the same quarterback back, and he just had a wide receiver 4 season. So maybe he doesn't do that. Maybe he drops to wide receiver 14. But I'm willing to bet on Mike Evans. Joe, Jameson, anybody disagree? Agree?
I won't say anything. Yep.
I would say he probably needs to move up 2 tiers, honestly. Mike Evans and Tyreek Hill are the same age. So we talk about Mike Evans being old.
Are they really?
But we have, 30.
Wow.
And he just signed, a 2-year deal? So it'll be around the next 2 years. 1,000 yards every single year. I think he needs to make the jump at least one. And I'd put him in tier 3 personally.
All right. Joe, are you up for a double jump?
Let's do it.
All right. We need a little bit veteran presence in that tier 3. So Mike Evans does the unprecedented double tier jump. Wow. Even the Russian judge would give that a 10. Let's go back to tier 5. Any of these other 50 receivers in this tier? Joe, I'll let you go first. Who else do you want to pound the table for?
I think we got to bring Davante Adams up. I think you could argue 2 tiers for him as well, though the Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell is going to keep me from doing that. But for sure, 1 tier.
I mean, Minshew did make Pittman look great last year.
Yeah, Stain Steichen also covered up the fact that Gardner Minshew is a bad quarterback, and I don't think Luke Getsy is going to do that at all.
All right, Jameson, Davante Adams, does he move up a tier?
Yeah, definitely. I love Davante Adams, but Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell just suck astronomical amounts of ass.
And what's scary is Getsy might be worse. So
yeah, and Luke Getsy is just the drizzling, you know what. So we'll leave him at tier 4 for Davante Adams.
All right. So Davante Adams is moving up 1 tier. I don't even know when we started talking about that. Sorry, Gary, with my timestamps. I'm just making some numbers up. Who else is moving up, Jameson?
I've got a couple.
Give me one.
I'll do Deebo Samuel for now. He's not my favorite wide receiver.
Okay.
He's not my favorite, but especially if he's in the Shanahan offense, at least for 1 year, you know that he's going to get the scheme touches. He'll be doing, just the stuff that they always do in San Francisco. And I'm a little worried about his future if he goes somewhere else. I'm not sure if another offensive coordinator, if they go to a less creative one, will get to him as much as Shanahan did. But at least for the next year, I think he belongs. I'd rather have Deebo over Pickens, Jackson Smith, and maybe Zay Flowers, depending on my mood.
Joe?
I don't think I'm going to do it. Just injuries. I don't think he's in San Fran after this year. I think it's reasonable, but I don't see him getting the rushing upside and much more.
Yeah, I have to agree with Joe. Man, Jameson.
Wide receiver 8 last year.
I know. I am not a fan of Deebo Samuel. I think rushing yards are going to go to CMC. I don't think Deebo's going to be as involved, especially as he ages. Even if we're looking at a 2-year window or a 3-year window, I think he'll still be playing in 3 years. But if he goes to another team that's not Kyle Shanahan, do I really have as much faith in what happens to Deebo at that point? I don't. So I think Deebo stays where he is.
I love Deebo. I love him as a player. It's so scary.
I don't like him. But Joe, do you have anybody who you think should move up?
I think we should talk about Christian Kirk.
Okay.
I think I would move him up. I think he's the clear one, at least this year. Brian Thomas Jr. being there now, who also I think you could make an argument. Actually, I'm going to say both Jags receivers. As breaking right before we recorded, Trevor Lawrence signed a 5-year, $275 million extension.
Wait, what?
Yeah. Yep. Or agreed to. 5 for $275, unless my...
Yeah, that is ridiculous, kid. I agree with whoever laughed at that. Wow, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, I think it's a great value, but that great deal. That's another topic, though. But
oh yeah,
yeah.
So you're going to argue for Kirk and Thomas moving up?
Yeah, Kirk I think is the clear top target there. Evan Ingram had a bunch of catches last year. I think there's a lot more to it than Evan Ingram being good. Christian Kirk really was and I was really low on him going into last year, but I think he really showed out and was the top guy, at least for a down in, down out basis. Largely because they also were misusing Calvin Ridley, but again, Press Taylor, what are we doing here? I think he's going to get 100 catches this year, maybe. Then Brian Thomas, I think he's a better version of George Pickens and T. Higgins. Not a perfect comparison, but I'm willing to bet on that upside as a top 25 pick, 25th, something like that. But
okay. So Jameson, what do you think about the two Jags?
I think Brian Thomas should stay. And then Christian Kirk, I kind of struggle with. He only had 3 touchdowns last year. And there were some clips going around on the Twitter sphere that just how close I think the Jaguars on offense could have hit more last year as far as just drops or, 1 foot out of the end zone. It almost seems like if a couple would have swayed the other way, maybe we would think about Calvin Ridley in a different light, and then Christian Kirk as well. So he struggles. I think he's more of a consistent player and not more of a high-end guy. He only had, before he got injured, he only had 2 games over 100 yards. I don't know if that's a Press Taylor thing or if that's just Christian Kirk as far as his floor goes. So I'm conflicted. I'm going to say both stay here. If I would move one, it'd be Christian Kirk.
I would agree with that, by the way.
All right. Well, since you both agree on Kirk, I will move Kirk. You disagreed on Brian Thomas. I'm going to go with Brian Thomas staying in tier 5. What about Stefon Diggs? Jameson?
I'm not in on him. Personally, last 2 years, he has fallen off a cliff the second half of the year, whether that's injuries, whether that's his attitude. And then he goes into a really crowded room with CJ Stroud. You know, if CJ Stroud's really supposed to support all three wide receivers, plus Dalton Schultz, plus Joe Mixon getting the ball as an upgrade over Devin Singletary. I just he's not somebody I'm really wanting in Dynasty, and if I can move off of him, I'd love to, but I'm having a hard time putting a price on it either, or as well.
Okay, Joe, Diontae Johnson.
Oh, yep. I completely agree on Stefon Diggs, but
Okay,
Diontae, I think that's so tough. I think I'm going to leave Diontae. I really think it's very similar to Christian Kirk, but the quarterback difference is massive in terms of size and talent.
Okay, guess I'm alone. Jameson, any thoughts on Diontae Johnson?
I don't think
Moving
it's
up a tier?
unreasonable, by the way. But
I like him. I'm pretty close to moving him up, honestly. I'm very in on him, especially at his price. I think he's a great buy low right now. I don't think Carolina Panthers on offense will get any worse. Diontae Johnson, we know he's a really good route runner. His hands could be a little iffy at times, but I think the product in Pittsburgh was just god-awful. And I know we're pretty down on the Panthers, but I really like Dave Canales, and I think that he can do some stuff, and it's pretty clear that they have a plan for Diontae. I think I would move him up.
I think you guys have swayed me.
All right,
Fine.
Diontae Johnson moves up a tier. Lots of movement. Some big names still left here. We have Cooper Kupp, Terry McLaurin, Jayden Reed, Rashee Rice. Jameson, anybody else you think should move up a round?
Amari Cooper, just one of the more underrated. He's age 30, so he's in that Mike Evans kind of tier, but wide receiver 14 last year. Did it with all sorts of different quarterbacks with, obviously Deshaun Watson and then Joe Flacco at the end there. He's just been one of these guys who goes under the radar. I think it's maybe because of his draft capital. We thought that he might be a little more than what he ended up being. But, I mean, I think he's super solid. Low-end wide receiver 1, top wide receiver 2 type of talent. And I just like him with Kevin Stefanski, so I'll move him up.
Joe, Amari Cooper moving up?
No objections.
All right, Amari Cooper moves up. Gentlemen, anybody else moving up?
3 more names I think we need to touch. Cooper Kupp, the injuries and Stafford's age, I don't think we move him up, but I wouldn't fight it. I think it's similar. Then there's the Terry McLaurin. I'm not a Jaden Daniels believer as a passer, so I don't know. Then I am for sure moving Chris Godwin up, which I assume I'll be alone on. Him moving back into the power slot role this year, where he had a wide receiver 2 overall finish. Kiddo's excited about Chris Godwin as well.
Hey, listen, he's a Penn State grad. I agree with the kiddo. Jameson, what do you think about Chris Godwin moving up a tier?
I would leave him. I'm a little worried about the offense with Dave Canales gone. I do agree that I think Chris Godwin will be better than he was last year, just because the usage, the moving into the position is probably a little bit more natural to him. But he's just somebody I think I'm just going to leave here. And then the other 2 that we talked about, Cooper Kupp, he's 31. I've really struggled if last year was injuries or if that's a decline. I mean, some of the numbers suggest he's doing a bit of a decline, so I'd leave him here. And then Terry McLaurin, even though he's here from Indiana, I've always struggled with. I just think he's an older wide receiver who, kind of like an Allen Robinson, we lost the good years for him, and then when he finally gets quarterback, it's the back end of his career, and he's just not, what we hoped and dreamed just because of the environment. So I think I'd probably leave him here.
Sneaky older player.
Yeah, unfortunately, his age really did sneak up on a lot of us. All right, so I agree with Cooper Kupp. F1, I can get on board with. Chris Godwin, you guys disagreed. I'm actually going to go with Jameson and leave Godwin in this tier. I'm hoping that he does have a bounce back, though, and proves us both wrong. Looking at this tier, then, anybody we want to move down Joe?
Rashee Rice, maybe, but I feel like that's more of not a decision we can really make today with the legal stuff. Aside from him, there's a Xavier Worthy thing, which I know all of us hated that pick, but he is still with Patrick Mahomes, so that means something. I think I'm content with this tier as is, pending the Rashee Rice legal stuff.
All right. Jameson, anything besides the Chiefs receivers?
I don't think so. I can't. Rashee Rice will either be a great buy low or a sell. I mean, he can be teeter-totter in between. I'm not big on Xavier Worthy. I'd probably actually move him down. I think he'll be a better NFL receiver than he will be a fantasy receiver. I don't think he'll be somebody. Worthy. I should have. Yeah. I just think that, he might have a couple big games, but they kind of come in pockets. Andy Reid has really rotated his wide receivers, and he's sitting behind Hollywood Brown and Travis Kelce and Rashee Rice when he comes back, who did good last year when he was on the field. I just really struggle with him. I don't think he's just one of those players that fantasy football community thinks really sexy, and then kind of turns out that it's just a little more of a facade.
All right. So let's keep that tier as is then. And we're going to take a look at tier 6. Now, tier 6 is another solid size tier. We have Christian Watson, Calvin Ridley, Ricky Pearsall, Hollywood Brown, Keenan Allen, Xavier Legette, Jameson Williams, Josh Downs, Adonai Mitchell, Courtland Sutton, DeAndre Hopkins, and Jahan Dotson. There's definitely one player in here who I think needs to move up. But, Joe, do you see anybody?
I see someone I would jump 2 tiers.
Do tell.
It's Calvin Ridley, now with the Titans. I would pretty easily bump into tier 4. Big money deal. I think he showed really well last year. There are some issues, of course, but he didn't play in 20 months, was it, since his last game? And I still finished as a wide receiver. I just closed the tab, but I think he was wide receiver 17 last year with a bad offense and his first time back in a long time. Yeah, he's 29, but I think 2-3 year window, I think he can be really good. And unlike you, I am a Will Levis believer. So I think he can be enough to be in that tier 4 for sure.
And I definitely think him moving inside, right? If he's allowed to play the slot a little bit more, which will play to his strengths. I'm not against that move. Jameson, though, you're the one who has to agree.
I think Calvin Ridley moves up. Oh, man. Moves up 1 tier. I'm going to be higher on him. I think he can belong in tier 4.
Well, you both agree on tier 4, so consider Ridley moved to tier 4.
Look at
Jameson, who else is in this tier that you want to see moved up?
I know they're older players, but both Keenan Allen and DeAndre Hopkins, I think, should move up at least to the 1 tier. I know they're older players, but I think they have great use. I'd rather have them than some of these other guys in the tier 5 camp. And especially DeAndre Hopkins, I think I like Calvin Ridley a lot, but DeAndre Hopkins was still good last year, even though I think the Titans' environment on offense can be much better. And I know the touchdowns weren't there, but, him and Will Levis hit it off the first game, and it kind of fell apart afterwards. But I think both those guys belong. And I think they're still viable dynasty assets, even if they're older.
All right, Joe, D-Hop, does he move up a tier?
I agree on Hopkins. I feel like he's firmly in that mix with the Diggs, Cup, Godwin, etc. Those veteran guys.
What about Keenan Allen?
With him being a decent amount older than them, I hesitate. But no, let's move him up because I think he does probably have the best quarterback of that group of players. So I think that builds in a lot for him, and I think he could be maybe not a 2-year play, but I think he can be really good this year.
I
as
agree
are the Rainbows.
with both of you that he could put up an entire rainbow of points this year. And that was a solid point. Jameson, who else in this tier do you think should move up?
I would say maybe Courtland Sutton, just for environment purposes, being the only decent wide receiver in Denver. If Bo Nix locks onto him, he was pretty decent last year in fantasy. He's not my favorite, but I mean, I still think I would take him over Xavier Worthy at least in that tier, possibly Jayden Reed. So I'll nominate Courtland Sutton, but if he wants to stay here in tier 6, I get that too.
All right, Joe, Courtland Sutton.
I don't know. I don't think I have a very strong opinion at this point.
Yeah, I do. I don't think you should move up, Joe. I'm not a big fan of Courtland Sutton. And actually, the more you talk, Jameson, the more I want to move Xavier Worthy out of tier 5.
I think we should.
All right.
I don't think it'll be popular, but I think we should do it.
Well, listen, we're not popular. So,
Sure.
well, we have one fan. Thank you. All right. So Xavier Worthy moves down. Keenan Allen, D-Hop moves up. Who else in this list? Courtland Sutton stays still. Joe, anybody else you think should move to the left?
I don't think so.
Jameson?
Just going to do my homer pick here. I want to make the case for Xavier Legette. I just think that out of some of these wide receivers in tier 5, I think if something were to happen to Diontae Johnson, I think Xavier Legette has a chance at wide receiver 1 in Carolina. He's facing Diontae Johnson and Adam Thielen and rookie tight end Sanders, who outside of last year, tight ends kind of take a little bit longer to produce on the field just because they got to learn everything on the offense, not just, running routes. But it just more because all the other wide receivers are in that tier as well. I think Legette has a really good chance at having, probably the best spot. Whether he hits or not is a different thing, but just as far as opportunity.
All right. Joe, Xavier Legette, does he move up to tier 5?
He doesn't for me. No, Jameson's way higher on him than I was, but
shameful.
I just don't see the wide receiver skills for him. And with an uncertain offense and a limited upside quarterback, I don't know.
He should play in Missouri because I need him to show me before I move him up. Going back to tier 5, Jayden Reed. We're all good with Jayden Reed in tier 5? I know, Jameson, you kind of mentioned that bothered you a little bit.
I'm worried that all the Packers wide receivers are just going to cancel each other out. That is my thought process. I think Christian Watson is really good when he's healthy. I think Jayden Reed's okay. I think Dontavian Wicks is pretty good. Bo Melton was even pretty decent, and they have 2 tight ends in Musgrave and Tucker Kraft that are both good. And it's not a player take. There's just so many weapons. And plus, they run the ball first. I don't know if people forget that with LaFleur, but I think Josh Jacobs is going to have all the opportunity in the world. So I know he had a lot of touchdowns last year, but it just kind of Russian roulette. And I think it's more of a Jordan Love fantasy year than it is these wide receivers.
A bunch of guys with 80 receptions.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Anybody else then? All
no
right.
one I'd move up.
I don't think so.
Very good. Now, the big question is, who are we moving down from this tier? Is there anybody we don't believe in at all?
I don't believe in Christian Watson one bit. I think he's the 4th best wide receiver on his team. I would make an argument Bo Melton's better than him if we're factoring in the health.
Jameson?
I like Christian Watson. He's a big, deep threat waiting to happen. And I know he's got like half a hamstring on one leg and a full one on the other. And they're trying to do like some equilibrium stuff with him. But I think he fits really well with Jordan Love. off that back foot and just that deep threat that can hit kind of like a Tank Dell as far as the way he's going to hit in fantasy. So I like him. I think he's going to have a nice year if he's healthy.
Well, as the judge, I would think hamstrings would be a lot like forearms. Most guys don't walk around with one giant forearm. So
Right.
I would think his hamstring should find some sense of equilibrium. I'm actually a fan of Christian Watson. If he can stay healthy, I think he'll at least be the wide receiver 2 on that team. But that's just me. So I'm going to leave him in tier 6.
A point in his favor is his touchdown rate is like on par with the elite receivers in the league.
Yeah.
I just think his best chance going forward is to severely cut his snaps and just have him as a gadgety sort of player. It's like make touches for him. It's very similar to Xavier Legette in the way I see him.
Okay.
At least Legette early on. Just start him with some made touches. There's a technical term for that that's just totally gone. Manufactured touches and big plays. But in a best ball league, I'm way more into a Watson. But
All right. So then let's take a look at the final tier. If we're leaving everybody else here. Now, this is a big tier. In fact, it doesn't even fit on the screen. So I'm going to copy these last 3 and bring them up to the top. Sit back, buckle in. Here comes the names. We have Polk, Franklin, Burton, Wilson, Judy, Myers, Dubs, Mims, Davis, Lockett, Williams, Wicks, Johnston, Shaheed, Baker, Samuel, Shakir, Palmer, Corley, and Wilson.
Woof.
We had 2 Wilsons. We had a Roman and a Michael. So take it all in. Look at the beauty that is tier 7. And Jameson, tell me who one receiver who definitely needs to move to the left.
For me personally, I like Jermaine Burton's future a lot, especially if T. Higgins is gone next year. He slides into wide receiver 2 behind Jamar Chase with Joe Burrow throwing the football. And I liked his tape. I know he's a little iffy as far as some of the character concerns, but if he can just stay on track, I think he's going to hit in a big way.
All right. Does Burton move up? Joe?
Absolutely.
Oh. All
I
right.
agree.
Yep.
I'll be damned.
All right. Joe, who do you have moving up?
Going to stick with a rookie, very on brand for me, but Jalen Polk. I think he's the best receiver in a room that has a great quarterback who will need a little time, yeah, but don't think he's ever going to be a wide receiver 1, but I think this is long-time wide receiver 2 for you.
So who did the Patriots sign at QB?
Drake.
No, that was just a joke. I'm picking
Okay.
on you. All right.
Gotcha.
So you think Jalen Polk should move up? I
Yep.
know your love of Drake May.
Yeah.
Jameson, do you share that love of Polk?
I do, and I would bring his counterpart, Javon Baker, up with him. One of these guys is, if you're talking, I know we're dynasty, but redraft especially or playing best ball, where they're getting drafted right now, one of these guys is going to blow their ADP out of the water. And I think Baker's got a little bit more upside to him. I think he actually fits Drake May's game a little bit better if he, starts midway through the year, or even week 1. Seems like he's good at dodgeball. I saw that yesterday, and seems like he's getting some good reports out of camp, but I'd bring both of them. I like Polk too.
Joe, does Javon Baker move over as well?
He can make crippled walk, so I guess might as well bring him over. But
He is over. All right. Joe, who do you have next in this tier moving to the left?
yeah, a lot of names here. I think. Sorry, kiddo's very excited with the show right now.
Aren't we all?
Yes, I am bringing Dontavian Wicks over. Talked about the Packers a little bit. I think he's really freaking good. I think there's a legit chance he overtakes Jayden Reed as the wide receiver 1 this year. I would very eagerly listen to tier 5 arguments for him.
Okay.
And I think I would move him up 2 tiers, to be totally honest, but I will accept him only moving up 1 tier for sure.
Jameson, should Dontavian move and how much?
I can do one. I cannot do two.
I think that's reasonable.
All right. Dontavian moves into tier 6.
Looking at some of the other names in tier 6, I agree. He should move up too. Sorry.
All right. Now, who else in here? Do we see Tyler Lockett? I mean, are we out this far out on Lockett? Is he done, Joe?
I don't think he's done. I don't know what to do with him. I feel like we probably should move him up. Like, he will get a chance next year somewhere else, but he's still under contract with Seattle, but there's almost no way he's going to stay there with a $25 million cap hit in 25. I think we move him up.
All right. Do you agree with that, Jameson?
He's a 31-year-old receiver. I just think he stays. It's not sexy, and I just don't think there's the upside. I think JSN has a little bit more of a role this year in Seattle. And then just as far as, being an older receiver, he's just not somebody I'm really thrilled to have. So I'm going to keep him in tier 7.
All right. I'll agree with you. I'm going to leave Lockett where he is. Wilson, Judy, Myers, Dubs, any of these guys floating your boat, Jameson?
If Myers was in a better situation, I would say him. I think he's underrated, but if he's going to stay in Las Vegas, I'm going to keep him here. But other than that, I don't think any of the other guys you listed.
All right, Joe, Mims Davis, Mike Williams, or Quentin Johnston?
No.
All right, let's finish this out then. Jameson, Shaheed, Samuel, Shakir, Palmer, Corley, or Michael Wilson?
I like Rashid Shaheed's game a lot. I worry a little bit about Derek Carr, but I think with Kubiak's new offense, I hope that they can get some stuff in there for Shaheed to. I mean, when he hits big, kind of like a Tank Dell, like I brought up earlier. I really like his game. I think he's an underrated wide receiver. And then, other than that, if somebody can pick out the Bills wide receiver between Samuel and Shakir, I'm struggling with both of them. I don't know how to list as far as the wide receiver one in Buffalo.
I think that's a solid point. I would lean Samuel, but I'm not choosing. Anybody out of that last group who you think should move over? Joe?
I agree with Shaheed. And then, one of the Bills.
Do we move them both? My thought is Shakir, I know, got a little banged up yesterday. I don't know if he's willing to take that role. Curtis Samuel isn't somebody who we have seen do it. We have Keon Coleman in tier 5. So in general, Fantasy Pros is telling us what they think about who their wide receiver one is going to be. I would leave both of the Bills guys where they are. Michael Wilson might be somebody I would think about bumping over a little bit, just because I think there's going to be a lot more open for him with the addition of Marvin Harrison. But I'm also not pounding the table for that.
Yeah, I can see Michael Wilson as a wide receiver too, kind of moving over. He's not the sexiest pick, so it's kind of hard, but I think there's a case for him to end up in tier 6.
Joe?
I'd leave him in tier 7. Just also there's Trey McBride, who is getting a lot of hype as the overall tight end 1. So I think there's just too many mouths to feed. And then James Conner, Trey Benson running. And it's I'd leave him here. I think we've got it set now. Like just
all right.
Jacoby Myers again. I would he should be up, but Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell.
Yeah, I still like Jacoby Myers as well.
So good.
Come on. On the count of 3, say what tier he should belong in. 1, 2, 3, 6.
6.
Yeah,
all right.
Let's do it.
He's moving up. Oh, no, I just replaced Shaheed. All right. Jacoby Myers moves to tier 6. And let me quick run through all the receivers in every tier. Just kidding. That would take way too long. Gentlemen, looking at our finished product, was this harder or easier than you thought it would be, Joe?
A lot harder. So many names, a lot of great players. Like, I don't think the guys in tier 6 or 7 are bad players at all. It's like,
well, we went through 74 wide receivers. That's a lot of wide receivers to look at. Jameson, how did this go for you?
I think it's harder, especially if you're trying to balance age and, rookies. We saw that Mike Evans was 2 tiers behind Tyreek Hill, and when you can't sit there and compare age for every player, but they're not really that far off. And I just think those discrepancies, I think offensive environment, like we talk about Jacoby Myers, if he was anywhere else in the world, we would love him. He's in Las Vegas, most dangerous place on earth, and it just makes that pretty hard. So it's really just a balancing act, and I think if anybody were to rank these guys, it would be all over the place.
All right, gentlemen. Well, we're not just a bunch of pretty faces here at IDP Plus. We have an entire suite of tools and rankings for both offense and defense. So right now, get your first month for just $1 with the promo code MOCKDRAFT. So head over to idpguys.org after the show to get ahead of your lazy league mates and start your march towards fantasy football greatness today with the promo code MOCKDRAFT. The link and details are in the show description. Gentlemen, it is time for tags where we share any final thoughts and let everyone know where they can find us. Joe, you are up first.
You can find me on Twitter at Jolo63. Nothing too crazy going on right now. Just some generic fantasy football, and Orioles stuff going on. And Star Wars. Always Star Wars.
Always Star Wars. Jameson.
I'm over on the Twitter machine at Jameson Rules. Also in Discord, IDP Plus Discord. Get in there. Hang out, ask some questions, and also in the best ball street. So if anybody wants to draft some best ball with me, I'm all day and night.
I might take you up on one of those. I'm at JJ Wenner on Twitter. Thank you, Joe Jameson, for all of your work on this episode. Special thank you to the whole IDP Plus crew for helping produce the pod. Be sure to tune in next Wednesday to the All Out Blitz, where Doug and I play our final game of Smash or Pass. Then come back on Friday for the Rod Pod, where we will take a look at tight end tiers. So from all of us to all of you, be safe, be well, and as always, my friends, boat drinks.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.